I think we're good to go.
All right.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley O'Shea, and I'm a documentary director, DP, based in Chicago. Here with,
My name is Nosheen Dadaboy, and I am also a documentary cinematographer. Ashley and I are part of the steering committee for the Documentary Cinematographers Alliance, and we're here to talk about the best practices guidelines that we created for working documentary cinematographers, which we define as people whose work 50% of their work comes from working as cinematographers for hire in the documentary space. And that includes Emily Topper. And I'll let Emily take over from here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Topper. I am one of the many cinematographers that has been hearing about and now benefiting from this new group and getting some clarity on my own work through understanding the guidelines and collaborating with all my other documentary cinematographer colleagues who I've always known were out there. And because of this group, I'm now starting to actually connect with and have really meaningful conversations about how we can improve our careers and the environment that we work in.
and maybe before, oh,
Yeah, I don't know if you want to set up how the DCA came together.
oh, I'm the storyteller for that? Okay. I feel like I only know half of this story.
I can start and then you can take over. How's that?
Okay, that works.
So I think like a lot of other professions in the documentary space, a lot of DPs had downtime during COVID, downtime that we'd never had before, and also had time to connect with each other during that time. And I think it allowed a lot of us to think about, how we were using our time, and also what kind of lives we were creating for ourselves, like working in this business as documentary DPs. And at first it started out as a support group, I think, just to get us through COVID. And then it morphed into how can we think about ourselves as an advocacy group for documentary cinematographers and come together and create something that we can all, that will allow us to advocate for ourselves, but advocate for ourselves with the power of a community behind us, because so many of us were facing similar challenges. Go for it, Ashley.
Yeah. So this is Ashley, and so from that moment, we came together officially as the Documentary Cinematographers Alliance, and one of the first things that we kind of did or organized around is specifically what the session is about today. Is our standardized practices, and recognizing that many of us are not in the union or have a specific set of protocols that we are required to follow as independent documentary cinematographers. This working group came together to really talk about the ideal protocol, ideal collaboration setting, and just ideal set experience across different cinematographers. And so today we're here with Emily to really discuss how she has or has not experienced these standardized practices in her work. And we're going to share out, and I believe it'll be somewhere on the screen where you can access this list that we've come up with, which is really it starts all the way in pre-pro and goes all the way through post in crediting. And so we're really hoping by sharing these out today, not just as doc cinematographers, but also as producers, directors, and other folks in the industry, that we can really create a template for independent DPs to work from. And I just want to say also that this is by no means, like I said, it's not a union. These are not required protocols, but simply a template for people to pick and choose from what works best for their practice. And we also recognize that people are working in different regions with different types of collaborators. So this is really just like the starting point to how you want to, I guess, craft your own independent DP experience.
This is Nosheen. I'm just going to jump in with one last sort of caveat before we hand it off to Emily to talk about her experiences, and just say, like, Ashley mentioned this, like these guidelines are kind of an ideal. They're called best practices, so they're the best practices.
I was like, I think I called it the wrong thing.
So we think about that as like this is something for all of us to aspire to, and I think what we're really asking for is that these are conversations that we can have, that each of these points that we bring up should be things that we are in discussion with the directors and producers and everyone else that we're collaborating with.
All right.
Yeah.
This is Emily. I will, I think, introduce myself a little bit, but I think maybe the best way to do that is to also talk about how I came to learn about the DCA, because I think it's really telling about what my work experience has been to date. In the middle of the pandemic, well, interestingly, I think a lot of documentary DPs found themselves in an unusual position during the pandemic, where for a few months we were out of work because the whole world was sort of, the film world was a little bit in shock. But then we all went back to work quicker than everybody else and have been really busy since then. And it's an interesting thing about documentary where, in a way, we are not always in sync with the trends of the wider film world, and at times that can be incredibly problematic, and we don't necessarily have the standards and the unions and the agents that are protecting us. But on the other side of on the flip side of that is that we're very nimble and surprisingly can have a lot of work when other DPs don't have work, and have a different kind of relationship to the freelance life than a lot of, I think there are ways in which documentary DPs are so nimble that we can adapt really quickly to changing circumstances. So where I was when the DCA came to my attention was in the midst of the early days of the pandemic, freaking out a little bit, trying to figure out what this was all going to mean for me personally, and also reaching out to a lot of my colleagues who I hardly ever get to see if I'm not working with them, and trying to make sure everybody was okay. And then this group, literally in my mind, from out of the clear blue day, just sort of arrived in my inbox. And it was so many of the things that I may have like had a passing thought about over the years of, wouldn't it be cool if something like this existed? And I just would have these passing thoughts, but I think a lot of us in documentary film, there's not a lot of cohesion. We're not together. We're siloed on different projects and in very small crew arrangements. And we don't end up getting a lot of face time with one another to have ideas like this gain traction. And so I probably was like all the other DPs of my generation, where we'd had this thought 100 or even 1,000 times. And it was like in the middle of the night, and then we got up and went to work the next day, and nothing there was no momentum built. But as soon as I saw the email in my box, I knew that that it was speaking to something that I'd thought and felt so many times before, that if we could come together as a community, we could support each other a bit more. We could share all these hard-won lessons we'd all been learning out on the road. We could help each other avoid some of those awful, horrible, humiliating mistakes that await us all the time. And we could just do better and be better because we were connecting with one another. So, which is to say, I guess the big picture I wanted to paint is that I do feel that the documentary field is one where cinematographers end up finding themselves incredibly isolated. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We work in these little fiefdoms. We have these little communities of people that we know, and we recreate those communities over and over again, and they kind of become a family, but they're very isolated from all the other communities. And there's so much potential that's lost because of that isolation. On the other hand, there's so much creative potential that's explored and gained when you have comfortable little fiefdoms. And so it's a push and pull that I have in my mind of really loving the freedom and the autonomy that comes with working as a documentary cinematographer and getting to kind of make it up as I go along and not feeling like I have to follow all these rules. And at the same time, feeling really lonely and isolated all the time and as a career, and not necessarily having an outlet for what I know could be like getting much more momentum and learning faster, all the things that I want to learn. So that's a long way of saying that's how this group fit into my life. And I'm hoping that's sort of revealing about what I feel in general about this job, which is on the one hand, I love how much of a Wild West we work in, and how much the documentary form is always changing. And in some ways, I personally see cinematography as being on the forefront of that change. When new forms are born, it's usually because we're in there working on these ideas with directors to create those new forms. And on the other side of it, we are in the Wild West. No one's looking after us. It feels like we get sent out into the unknown over and over again with only our own judgment as a protector. And if anybody is like me, I think most cinematographers don't have great judgment and don't have really strong self-protection instincts. We're artists and we're risk takers, and we get caught up in the moment all the time. And I mean, we love that part, but it also means that we make ourselves very vulnerable to being hurt on the job or being taken advantage of or whatever, you can imagine. I have been working as a documentary cinematographer for about 15 years. Before that, I came up through fiction lighting. I started out, like most cinematographers, kind of wanting to be every kind of cinematographer. It all seems fun. And then I came up through lighting and learned a lot about how the work environment works in fiction film. And when I kind of came out of lighting and started to try to make it as a DP, I brought a lot of those habits with me. So one of the things that I see in the best practices is a lot of the things that I had learned early on in my career from working on union sets and non-union sets that have to observe a certain, the length of day and turnarounds and meal times and all that stuff. And I feel very fortunate for that, because I sort of I became habituated to expecting a certain amount of stability in my work life. And it was easy for me to ask for it because I had experienced it for about 5 or 6 years working as a juicer or electrician. So that was good. What's really nice about the guidelines is that they make it transparent for everybody. So even somebody who doesn't come through a real structured narrative film union kind of environment gets to learn what those expectations are right away. And so we sort of get everybody to level set at the same place. So I keep getting back to the guidelines, but I'll try to tell you about my own work, which is about 15 years ago, I sort of pivoted and realized I'm going to be a bad DP unless I specialize in one thing, because it's too overwhelming for me to try to keep up with how you are a fiction filmmaker, how you are a commercial filmmaker, how you are a documentary filmmaker. Any one of these things is hard, and I can't do all of them well. And I can't network in all of those communities. Like, they're just very different worlds. And so I decided to specialize to self-preservation. And in documentary was a natural fit for me, partly because that's what I was getting hired to do, and partly because I like those jobs the best. And they fit with me for some reason. And I felt like I had a little bit of momentum there. So I became a documentary cinematographer, just self-proclaimed. It didn't mean anything at first. But once you decide to do just one thing, the world is happy to encourage you along that path. And I always feel like the more you specialize, the more work you get, ironically, which I didn't understand that when I was starting out, and I've learned that in the doing. But I have shot a lot of different kinds of films, all documentary. I would say that I think I'm known as more of a verite documentary filmmaker or cinematographer. And I think that's because I'm keen on doing verite and I can do it. I think lots of people, I think verite comes from practicing it. And so if you happen to have done a ton of verite films, you end up getting better at shooting verite. And so then everyone thinks you're a verite filmmaker. So I have a lot of practice. Yeah.
Can I, this is Nosheen, I just want to jump in for a second because I feel like you talked about going from being a juicer to being a DP, and then also especially working in the verite space. That's like a big leap to go from like a really structured environment to like really unstructured.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of us face the most challenges on verite docs, and especially in terms of like just the schedule, you know, and just having like knowing when meal breaks are and things like that. And I guess like how were you in those early days bringing some of those practices from your days as a union electrician into those spaces?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just say, I think there's something about not thinking that something is going to be a problem and coming in with expectations, because I don't recall in my early days feeling like I had to fight really, really hard for things that I know my colleagues have to fight really hard for. And I think it's because I had become so habituated to baseline, you know, a day can't be longer than 12 hours or else it's going to be paid overtime, and the turnaround time and the meal time, that I found it, I could ask for that stuff in a way that was just very plain. And it's interesting because there are other things that I have a harder time asking for that I find I get less good results from. And I think it's because I feel that there's a risk to asking for it, whereas I don't feel that way. When it's something that you get used to, it becomes it becomes easier to ask for it, which is one of the things I think about the guidelines is normalizing behavior is kind of what brings the change about. If asking for something feels like an outlying experience and it's nerve-wracking, my experience in this business is you don't usually get what you're asking for. A, it's nerve-wracking, and B, it's an outlying request. And so you have like no momentum, no momentum on your side. And I think having worked, and this might be a Los Angeles thing because I'm based here, I think there was a level setting with my collaborators that allowed for that. I mean, as I'm saying that, I have to be honest with you, I'm flooded with counterexamples in my mind as I'm saying this, and I don't want to be misleading at all. There are, in verite films especially, I can think of so many times where I would presume that a boundary would be respected, and then I would discover that it wasn't respected, and I would have a real sense of disappointment that I had to ask for something that to me should have been granted without requesting it, and have had worries about relationships, fallouts from those things. I mean, I can think of a lot of times where things went a little bit off the rails, but it really did help me, I think, that I came in really understanding what I considered to be safe practices and really willing to stick by them. And I'm not super great at self-advocacy, so that muscle memory took me a long way. If I hadn't learned it, I wouldn't have dared to, you know, so that's why I really feel for the documentary field where so many of us don't come up through something as rigid. And not everybody lives in Los Angeles where they have the opportunity to work on a gajillion low budget horror movies. So that was an opportunity that I had because of my hometown. But that's, if I lived and worked in Baltimore, there wouldn't have been those opportunities. So I think most of us don't come up through the ranks, nor there's no reason why we should. Like we all have different opportunities, and so that's what I love about these guidelines, is because it helps normalize, level set, and kind of democratize what everyone who's been doing this work for a long time knows is a baseline in terms of sustainability and safety, and that's great. It's like sunshine on something that we all carry around in our head, but we've forgotten to share it.
Emily, can I?
Oh, go ahead.
This is Ashley. Emily, I just wanted to kind of dive deeper into if you have any specific like examples or analogies you can share around either advocating for yourself and succeeding or advocating and having a more difficult time. And I know you have a couple films that you wanted to bring in the space as well. So I wanted to just name those two if you like.
The way I was sort of thinking about talking about this is talking a little bit about how I think this is something that I'm hoping will connect with anybody watching this or any cinematographer out there, is how to start a job, how to not how to interview. I'm just going to assume that you're getting the job, but how to navigate the very, very early stages of the job, because I think that's the time that's so critical to managing the expectations and setting out on the right foot relationship wise. So that's what I was hoping to kind of talk about. And I do have a couple projects I can be specific about. But so basically, I've been reflecting on this a lot since you guys invited me to do this. I think that, and I've done this wrong, by the way, a cajillion times. So this is a very hard one lesson. I think the time to address the kinds of things that are coming up in the guidelines is very, very, very early, to get ahead of these problems. Throughout most of my career, literally up until probably the last couple of years, I had this approach of let's jump in, hope for the best, kind of love everybody and everything until you're proven otherwise, and just be that kind of artist person who just shows up and gives a project your all. And then if problems arise, deal with them. Unfortunately, that means that when the problems arise, you're completely on the plane already, and you're on potentially a broken plane, maybe crashing, and you really can't deal with the problems in the moment. You know, I mean, as documentary film people, we know that once we're filming a scene or once we're in the midst of a shoot, we are so committed and all in. You know, there's this like unspoken rule about never having any drama on set, never being a squeaky wheel. We're supposed to be completely need free once we're in it's a little bit like a soldier on a battlefield or something like that. So I really think pre-production, I don't know what the word is for it. There's pre-production and then there's pre-production. And the pre-production is the place where so many things could be headed off. And it's something that I'm committed to trying to move forward with my own work. And I wish I'd been doing this a lot sooner. So basically, there are kind of two projects that are like really, really near and dear to my heart that I can talk about. And I think they exemplify what I think is very typical situations that I work in every day. And they both were really positive experiences. So, and they're both films that I think are easy to find. So if people can want to see them, they're easy. The one is a commissioned film for the New York Times Presents series. It's a television series called Framing Britney. And that was put out by Hulu. And the production company was Left Right, and they have a long history. This is maybe their second or third season of doing this show. And when you work for Left Right, you are slotted in as almost like a stringer. It's not a artistic cinematographer relationship-based experience. You get called up usually not long before the whole film starts, and you get enlisted to jump in, and you kind of pick up the baton where it's being handed to you. There's not a lot of culture impact that you can have. That company is up and running. They will do this project with or without you. It really has nothing to do with you. You're just kind of jumping in and fulfilling a role. They're lovely people, but that's not the model that they use is like very industrialized, and you have to fit into that. And so the Framing Britney Spears was made in that milieu. And the reason why it was I think the reason why it's an interesting one to talk about here is because that industrialized model of filmmaking is extremely common. And I think as a cinematographer, you can easily feel like you don't have a place in there to level set or to have an effect on the culture of the filmmaking. And that was an experience where I was part of a much larger system, but the people in those roles were wonderful. And we were able to create a feeling of making something that was artful, intentional, that we weren't just fly by the seat of our pants. And so it was an interesting one because I had artistically a richer experience than I've been allowed to have on projects that from the outside would look much more like an artistic cinematic experience. I think one of my big things I want to say about this pre-production period is it's a time when, as a cinematographer, you're really, really trying to be an investigator and you're trying to suck in all clues you possibly can about a project so that you can decide before it's too late to back out of it, because we have to make all these decisions all the time about which jobs to take. And it's in a very early stage that you can kind of go looking for clues as to whether this is a good fit for you. And one of the things that I think would be a really great way to gather clues very quickly is to begin to broach many of the things along the that are in the guidelines. And it's not like necessarily you sending people the guidelines and then saying, hey, take a look at this and I want to talk about it line by line. It's more like you read the guidelines, you remind yourself what you need to do in order to be the best cinematographer and the most effective cinematographer you can be, and then you let that kind of inform your conversation. So it's something like you get the call from the executive producer at Left Right, they tell you about the project, they ask if you're available on particular days, and then you can turn around and say, you have to sign a million things, NDAs and all this stuff. And you can then turn around and say, well, I'd like, can I hear a little bit about what pre-production looks like? Talk to me about how much time the director has to work with their DP. How much lead up is there? How much am I going to be involved in designing the interviews? I would like to be really involved in designing the interviews. And do you have money set aside to pay for pre-production? And on and on. You could go through literally every part of the process. And it's very customizable, and it has to do with how you want to work and what your instincts are as an artist. But you can kind of cherry pick from that list to kind of build out the job that you want it to be. And this is all kind of it's like you've probably gotten the job, but you haven't signed on the dotted line little middle ground, which is a really critical little time period that we have. And it's one of the few times where we actually have any leverage, because once we're in that project and we're like in go mode, we're usually working so quickly and we are trying our best to make it all happen that it's really hard to pull back and try to affect the culture or the process. And so that's why I personally am really trying to get better at taking a little bit more time before I jump into something so headstrong. I think most cinematographers are very headstrong type of people. So it's like taking a little bit of a breath before that to make sure that this is going to be a good experience. Well,
can I, this is Nosheen, I just want to jump in because I think like one of the things that we talked about in our pre-call is like just one of the reasons why the guidelines exist, and you could share them with a production company and say like, here's a group of DPs and we are all trying to adhere to these as like an idealized way of working, because it can be very scary before you've signed on the dotted line and you're like, I really want this project and I really want to keep this relationship, to ask for some of those things. And I guess like, what are some of the things that you were sometimes afraid to ask for that you think you are using in that investigation period and like saying like, that's a deal breaker for me, or like, like I would really have to have a conversation with somebody about this project. And I think the other thing that I kind of would love for you to touch on is, while all of those negotiations are also happening, we're also considering how much is this, like, am I going to put into this project artistically, and how much of an investment of myself am I going to put into this project? Because I think that also helps you weigh like what you're asking for. And so, for instance, if I'm going into an industrialized kind of system, then maybe you're like, okay, well, I need to make my day rate. And then if you're working on something where you're like, I really care and I just want this project to come to life, then you're like, maybe I'm going to give a little bit more leeway to these guidelines so that I can, but I know that I'm going to be like a part of the creative team of this film.
Yeah. This is Emily. I think that this is, I'm sure there are cinematographers out there who have a more consistent system. I am probably absolutely winging it all the time and just making these judgment calls about projects and going with an instinct and the longer, one of the things about this group is it's actually kind of helped me get a little bit of perspective. And so I absolutely think that we trade creative input for a rate. I mean, what we dream of is probably all the same. We want so desperately to be on a film that we love, working with a director that we love, feeling seen and heard, and doing what we consider to be our best work. That's like and we would probably all do that for like negative amount of money. I mean, we wouldn't because we would die, but we would just have fantasies about that all the time. And the reality is that it falls short usually in varying ways. And then we counter that by trying to buttress ourselves in other ways and saying, okay, I'm going to do this project, but I'm not going to give it too much of my time, or I'm going to do this project, but I'm going to charge my normal rate, take it or leave it, or I don't know. There's just so many ways where we hedge our, I don't want to say hedge our bets. We stack other things against the kind of ideal dream. I mean, and I think every cinematographer is doing their own brand of that. And it's a very individual to individual thing. And I think people have different styles of how they handle that dance. And I was just talking to a cinematographer friend yesterday on the phone, and it's interesting. It's like he does it differently than me, but he's totally doing it in his own way. And we were talking about how you choose between projects and the rank of like the art to the commerce, and everybody wants the art, and we have to also figure out the commerce side. So it's a long way of answering. I'm not trying to dance around your question, but the reality is that I would not call myself a poster child for having this all figured out. I mean, cinematographers end up running business, whether we like it or not. And I would say I'm horrible at that part of it and probably do things really inconsistently. I mean, there's one of those things where if it's really, really, really busy, you find yourself getting to be more picky. And when you're out of work, you find yourself just being so grateful that anything comes through the door, and your expectations shift. And again, that gets me to this whole guideline thing, because this business puts us in, there are times we're on the front foot and there are times we're on the back foot. And the guidelines helps kind of be for us too, a little bit of a level setter. So even on those times where we're really just desperate to work at all, we have those to look at and say, yeah, but remember, have a spine. Don't be a fool, And then there's times when you're working too much and you get to be a little picky, and you get to look at the guidelines and say, which one of these jobs should I do? Which one really fits with my values? Like, how many of these boxes are being checked by this one versus this one? And either way, these are just so useful. It's literally like the list in your head that should be written down and isn't. That I think anyone working for a long time in the business has this going on in their head, and now it's like out there on paper for all of us to just use it as a tool.
Well, I think I'll just say quickly, this is Nosheen, that part of it is also getting it out of our heads and putting it in the heads of our collaborators too, right? And saying like, these are all the things that we're thinking about. Can you consider these things too? And let's be able to have conversations about it. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Ashley, go ahead.
No, this is Ashley. I kind of wanted to jump in just in terms of this point of finding a balance between like the commerce of cinematography and the creativity of it. And I think this is especially something that as a director DP I struggle with a lot, because I'm outside of the projects that I'm working on as a freelance DP. I also have my own personal projects that I want to dedicate a certain amount of creative energy to on a regular basis. And so I think in a lot of ways, the guidelines I think can also be helpful in just like making those decisions, about, certain jobs or gigs that come your way that sometimes have, great premium rates, come with all the perks, but they might be, 5 days out of the month when you really need to be focusing on something else, or even not even just directing. It could be if you're the lead DP on a project and you need to dedicate, a week of prep time, in a way that you've been avoiding it. A lot of times, I think the kind of appeal of just like a job checking off the rate box, or like just one of the major things will sometimes, or even the name acclaim of things. I'm sure you both have faced offers or projects where people are coming from a company that you've always wanted to work with, or has put out other major projects. But as you start the process with them, you're kind of like, this, I don't think this is like the ideal environment for me to create. And unfortunately, a lot of times we go down the full path before realizing that. But I think the guidelines are a good way to kind of like just level set, like, is this just checking off one of the major boxes? Is this really just a payday or a clout thing? Versus like, is it really helping me to achieve the goals I'm looking to achieve as a cinematographer, and not just seeing ourselves also as like workhorses, like not just seeing ourselves as like below the line type creatives, and understanding that we are like part of this larger creative collaboration process.
I think, Ashley, this is Mosheen, you bring up two like really good points that we talk about in the best practices, and also just like the the goals of what the DCA is trying to do. And one is to have cinematographers less in that industrialized space and more as creative collaborators. But then two, I think one of the things that, Emily, you also touched on is like being on the back foot, and sometimes like feeling like there can be a lot of vulnerability in the way that work kind of like schedules, I guess, like for us, like, we have what looks like a seemingly very good rate for a day of work, but then you're also doing a lot of prep time. You're also, sometimes holding days and then giving up other jobs, and then that will fall through. And so I feel like the uncertainty of a lot of like the economics of it also is something that is playing into these conversations, and also I think really important to talk about in terms of what we're contending with when we look at like multiple projects, or when you're thinking about taking a job. Like that's a big piece of that is like, I need to work an X amount of days this month, and I need to know that's going to happen.
Yeah. I think that I've been doing this now maybe 15 years, and it just continues to feel like a crapshoot. I wish there was a way for us to publish guidelines about how to schedule ourselves, like a crystal ball. But that's part of this job, is that we have to throw our name in a hat and give it our all, and be creatively 100% tuned in with a director. And we don't know what's going to come of all that energy and exertion. We just don't know. And I think probably if you find yourself as a documentary cinematographer, if you find yourself not running for the hills from that, it's probably because there's a part of you that loves that mystery and the possibility. I do. That being said, it doesn't make for good planning. And I think so, to pick up on your thing about the rate, and just in general what the life is for a documentary cinematographer, there is a way in which and maybe this is true for all cinematographers, I don't know. I'm only in it this deep with documentary, so I'm not sure. But you have to be in a mindset to be a good documentary cinematographer. You have to understand how to build relationships really quickly. You have to be very physically fit and strong. You have to be very creatively fit and strong. You have to just go quick. You know, when you start a new project, it's like a fire hose all of a sudden. And that is a very particular skill set that you have to practice and get yourself to. And once you're in that shape, you're just kind of waiting around for the project to scoop you up and hoping that it does, so that you can pour all of you've built up all this energy, you want to pour it all into a project. And so we depending on, like, you don't know how much you're going to work, but you have to be ready to work all the time, and you have to kind of cultivate the mindset to be good at the job. And so it's great. It sounds crazy to say it, but you have to you don't know how many actual days you're going to get paid for, but you're pretty much always working on trying to be a good documentary cinematographer in one way or another. Like prep, post prep, all of it just sprawls out across your life. So it's like, we were just talking yesterday as we prepared for this call about how many days a month people work, and it ebbs and flows and all that stuff. But the reality is that, like, we're always working on doing this job, whether we're on set or not. And I think that people don't realize, like, I think that there's this idea of, well, where I'm going to pay for your time. I'm going to take you and I'm going to pay you for this day and thank you for your work. And now bye-bye. But what people don't realize is, for us to show up that morning and shoot what people want us to shoot is a lot of pre-work, not just pre-pro, but like preparation just to be able to have the skill set to do that. And so it's not the day rate is a day you're getting paid for that has so many more days attached to it that are completely invisible unless you're doing the work. And I don't mean to overstate it, like we're pumping iron all the time, or we're not, but there's just like a mental state that you really have to cultivate all the time to be good at the 3-day job that you have at the end of the month. And it's like a little teeny bit, I'm not going to try to say that we're like professional athletes, we're not, but it's a little bit like being a professional athlete in the sense of, when it's game day, you have to perform. And the work you actually do to get there is actually all before then. Like, we get paid to show up and have the game day, but that's not what professional athleticism, that's not the job. The job is what comes before then. So there's a level of that, I think. But
I think too, the risk in, yeah, no, this Ashley, I think there's a risk factor to it too, especially as a documentary DP, in showing up and performing on the day of whatever we're shooting, because it's like, a lot of times these are one-time only events, especially in verite. It's like, these are not moments that you will get a second chance to capture all the time. And so I think that that even speaks to these guidelines as well. As like, these are kind of all of the protections from pre-pro to production to post that I need in order to so that when the day actually comes, that I'm performing on my best level, because we may only have one chance to get this. So you're also kind of like, in thinking about rates and things like that too, is like, you're kind of paying for me to get it right. And you know, of course, that
100%.
doesn't happen all the time. Like, we make so many mistakes on set but usually they aren't dire and can be addressed. But I think that's a part of it too that doesn't always come with like fiction or narrative storytelling, because if anything, you can just book another shoot day and do it again. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and this is Emily. There's a big difference between fiction filmmaking and documentary fiction filming, and the riskiness of it. Fiction filmmaking has so scaffolded by so many fail safes. There's so many people working on something together. The jobs are all divided up. You really just have to get one little piece of it right. There's so much pre-production to kind of examine exactly how you're going to do something. And in documentary, it's like you just have to wing it. And if you aren't completely in the zone with that thing, you could get it really wrong. And we were hired to come onto a new project. It's an ecosystem. We have to kind of figure it out really, really, really quickly. And then we're thrown in to an environment, and we have to capture it. And we have to capture it the way the director wants us to. And figuring out how to do all of that really quickly is a challenge. And I think what our skill set is that we're good at that. That's what documentary cinematographers know how to do. But it's not something that just poof happens magically. It's a lot of preparation to get to a place where you are good at that, and there's things you can set yourself up for failure too, and you can set yourself up to be effective. And I think the guidelines are a really great list of things that are the healthy habits. These are the kinds of things you observe so that you don't get tripped up the day. That's, especially some of the health and safety ones.
And I think just to that point, this is Nosheen, that like, it's not just even like guidelines for you to do your best job, but it's also in service of the project being, or that shoot day. And like Ashley, you mentioned this too, like this is how we can all be successful in getting the footage that we need for that project. I do want to note that we have about 3 minutes.
I think we have, maybe not. I thought we had 15.
Well, that's like, if we wanted to leave at least like, we could say 8 more minutes, so we can leave 20 minutes for the Q&A. But I know, Emily, you wanted to talk about Light and Magic, and we haven't really had a chance to discuss that project.
Okay, yeah, totally. And that's great. So Light and Magic is a film on, so Framing Brittany, Light and Magic are very dear to my heart. They were my COVID jobs. They were the jobs that made it possible for my family to survive during this very crazy time. I had my COVID family pods with each of those projects. I like get teared up just thinking about the people that I got to work with then. We were in it in a major way together. So Light and Magic is a Disney Plus movie about the history of industrial light and magic. It's actually a film about filmmaking, and it's a film about collaboration. I was so inspired as a creative person from working on this and just hearing the stories. It was sort of like getting to see, it's a different craft doing visual effects, certainly, than being a documentary cinematographer. But the dedication and the intense, the momentum that can be created by collaboration was really what that story is about. It was really cool. But from my perspective, we did shoot some other scenes that weren't interviews, but it was a 95% an interview job. It was built for COVID. It was a COVID structured film. What can we do that's still complying within safety? So it was a really great experience because the director was out of narrative filmmaking. And Lawrence Kasdan, who is a writer, director, his only experiences, I think, prior to this were working on fiction films. And he was clearly habituated to collaborating with his DPs and to really holding them in high regard and to asking them for what they thought. And there was not even the shred of a feeling of being a hired gun or being a day player. And it was just this lovely experience of assuming there's going to be pre-production, being paid for pre-production, having time to experiment, having camera tests. This is the first time in my career where I've ever had any of these things. And it was sorry, dog. It was like, wow. And it was taken for granted because the culture of that film was sort of a hybrid narrative / documentary. It was like kind of what I was saying in the beginning, where so many people on that project were habituated to doing things in the fiction way. They just brought it over. And as a documentary person, I'm not habituated to it, but I love it. And I was happy to inherit some of those good, like, best practices. And a lot of the things aren't really that complicated or that pie in the sky. They're the kinds of things that are on our list. But they're just not the kinds of things that are normalized yet within documentary. And my experience on that film, I don't think that film costs much more money than any other documentary. I just think that they just decided to work the way they were used to, honestly. And it was a real eye opener for me, because I got to experiment in ways that I don't usually feel daring enough to do because of lack of time. You know, normally you sort of have to get it right the first time, and you design an interview and you just do your best and you hope that it was the best idea. You don't know, because you didn't have time to try anything else. This one, we had pre-light day or test shoots. So if we had a new idea, then they scheduled a test shoot, and then we tried it, and then it didn't work. And because I was so much more adventurous, so I was able to, like, do things that I just wouldn't have had the courage to do because they weren't foolproof, or they weren't fail safe. And then I knew I could fail. Everybody was on board. The director thought it was the way you're supposed to do things. And he wanted to see the failure to make sure that it wasn't the right thing. You know, it was just great. I felt just so supported, and it just really fed into my belief, which I keep saying over and over, which is the more we can pull these best practices into and normalize them and make them part of our work, the more we're going to be able to be more effective at our jobs. Like I ended up feeling so proud of the look that the group of us created, and it wasn't something that was a first draft. It was like a third draft, and that comes from because I was supported. You know, I was given the resources and the time to, like, work on an idea for longer than 10 minutes. So anyway.
And I think, like, this is Noshi, and I think we've talked about this in the best practices, because sometimes we're just struggling to have a prep day. And then I know I do this, I'm sure you all do, like, I can't sleep the night before because I'm like, everything has to go perfectly tomorrow because I didn't have a prep day, and somebody's going to pick up X piece of gear. And I hope I watched enough YouTube videos on, like, how is that going to fit in? Like, how am I going to set this up? And do I have every...
Just for it to still not
literally
work.
Every screw. Yeah. So I think, like, even just, like, prep days, you know, normalizing these things, we didn't get a chance to talk about, like, you know, travel days and kill fees, but, like, even talking about, like, safety on set and normalizing. One of the big things that we talk about is, like, normalizing not driving in the front seat, like, normalizing the safety of the people that are getting these shots. I think all of those things are what the DCA is really trying to achieve.
I think even, this is Ashley, I think even, like, small things like getting to know, or, like, knowing who's on your crew before you go into a shoot day, like, I feel like in documentary that's something that's so skirted to the side. But, like, so often, like you said, we're just dropped into these ecosystems. And you made a really good point yesterday, Emily, where you were just saying, like, we need time as new hire DPs to, like, figure out what ecosystem we're coming into, because we have to kind of adapt to whatever that is. But, you know, with filmmaking being so much of a collaborative practice, like, the end result of what you create is not going to be the ideal. You know, it's not going to come out ideally how you want it to be if you aren't with the crew or working with the crew that you, like, have some sort of relationship with. Like, I know we've all have experiences where the footage comes out and it's like, it you know, sometimes it's good enough, but other times it's like you can, like, feel the tension of, like, the day. Like, you can feel, like, or so many times I'll leave set where I'm like, the visuals came out fine, they came out great, but it's like I have a terrible memory of the day because of the experience. So, like, it's great to hear stuff about, like, your experience with Light and Magic. I think we all have, you know, maybe I only have, like, one or two of those type experiences where I can look back and be like, it was a great experience from beginning to end. And you can feel it in the end product, and it's like a better film because like we took all those necessary steps.
Mm-hmm.
Can I think also one of the, to that point of like not knowing the ecosystem, one of the things we discussed yesterday on our prep call was not knowing if the ecosystem includes you going out on your own without a director, sometimes having maybe not even a prep call with the director or somebody else that's shot on the film, and it's just like, this is the situation you're shooting, it's verite, go out and get it. And I've been in those situations where I haven't even had a PA, and I'm just like, okay, like good luck to me. And I think that is also something that is, unfortunately, I think that practice is becoming really normalized, and it's something that puts a lot of pressure on the DP to, one, capture a story that you're maybe not even familiar with, but then also do something that's in service of a director that you don't have a close relationship with. And you mentioned this yesterday, Emily, that like that's part of the investigation, that like you find out like and I never even thought about that as an investigation. I just like feel like I've been thrown into it so many times, and I still haven't. It was just a good point that you made, that I'm like, I'm gonna put this into my things to ask now.
Totally. Me too. This is Emily. I also have learned this late. I think that a great question early on in that pre moment is like, talk to me about how the director works with their DP. What does it look like? Like, do they do a lot of conversation ahead of time, and then is there a lot of independence in the moment? Or is it they don't know how to describe what they want, but they're right next to you the whole time, and you guys are working it out in the moment? There's just so many different ways it can go. I would say I've finally, after many moments, much heartbreak throughout 15, 20 years, I think a huge red flag is when you're not sure when there's any fuzziness around how the director is going to work with you. When the director is not on the call, just not available, very detached from the project. When that is over and over again has proven to be a huge red flag for me. When I look back on projects later, and I think, yeah, there was a phantom director. I didn't understand the director at the beginning, and at the end, I still don't understand the director.
Or I never met them.
Yeah, I never even met them. Exactly. Sorry about the barking.
I don't know if we want to just take a minute to wrap up. I have no closing remarks, but both of you can go ahead.
I think for folks that are on this call that are working industry documentary DPs, definitely reach out to us if you're interested in joining. We have an official membership in a Slack and all types of ways that we communicate, and we're still building out our own ecosystem of documentary DPs. So we would love to build that with you. If folks have questions or feedback about the guidelines, we're open to that as well. And yeah, I think we all just hope this could be a template as you move forward, whether you're a DP, producer, director, production coordinator, whoever's putting the call sheet together, to just make it a better experience all around. But yeah.
And this is Emily. I'll just say the last little thing, which is, if you're watching this and you're an emerging cinematographer, or you're a person or emerging documentary cinematographer, or you're a cinematographer and you're trying to figure out what little lane you want to be in, I think being a documentary cinematographer is an awesome job. And I feel like personally that there aren't enough of us. And I just would really hope that people think of it as a job. That there's challenges like any job, but it is so amazing. The work is extremely rewarding. I love documentary films. I don't feel like there are enough of us out there carefully, intelligently being behind the camera. And I think there's lots of room for this industry to grow, and there's a lot of spaces at the table for new people.
Wonderful.
Great. I think Abby is maybe gonna come on to tell
Yes.
people where to go.
Yay.
Okay.
Save us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much this is Abby. I am the Director of Artist Programs at IDA and the Conference Director of Getting Real. Thank you so much to Emily, Ashley, now Shane for the conversation that we just had right now. I think it's so important that we continue to illuminate the creative contributions and working conditions of all documentary practitioners, not only film directors. So thank you, Emily, for providing some words of encouragement at the end of this very real conversation. This event was pre-recorded due to the schedules of these working cinematographers that you see on screen. If you are watching this recording, then we suggested that you do, starting at 10 a.m. Pacific time at Tuesday, September 27th. Please join members of the DCA Steering Committee, including Ashley and Nosheen, who you see on screen right now, in a live Q&A breakout session for further discussion. To join the Q&A, click on the back button in the top left of your screen, and then on the left side of the new window, you will see a breakout room called Visual Arrangements. Members of the DCA's steering committee will be there to continue this discussion. If you are watching this recording after 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, we would love for you to continue to follow along by reading the DCA's best practices guidelines, which will be linked to from the right side of your screen right here. I think that's it. We will wrap up, but maybe if you all, Nosheen and Ashley, could answer just one last question, because we have folks in the audience who are joining us not only from the US, but from all around the world. To be a DCA member, do you have to be living and working in the US?
No,
Great
we have
question.
members from outside of the US, but most of the guidelines are like specific to the kind of working environment that we have in the US and Canada. So I think we can't speak to how everybody works, but we are open to having members contribute and say, like, if this is in the UK, like, we can have a little section of what the guidelines are for there, or I don't know, Korea or anywhere, you know, like, we're happy. We're definitely open to broadening our membership.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And I hope you all join us in the breakout session.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.